The wind carried the scent of smoke and blood across a frozen frontier moon. Out there, where trade routes had gone silent and crops barely grew, a lonely human farmer named Garen lived on 20 stubborn acres of soil. He had no neighbors, no family, just the echo of his own footsteps and the weight of silence. But that silence shattered the day he found them. 2 albino dragon hatchlings trapped in a cage of electric mesh, trembling as poachers laughed over their price. Dragons were legends, apex predators, symbols of power. But these were just children. And against all odds, Garen, the man who had sworn he wasn't a hero, decided to fight. What he didn't know was that saving them wouldn't just change their lives, it would change his. Because the dragons weren't just survivors. They were choosing him. And soon, the galaxy would learn what it meant when humanity stood between innocence and exploitation. If this story already has you hooked, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more epic human-first sci-fi tales, and share this with someone who loves stories about courage, survival, and the unexpected bonds that change everything. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this one unfolds. On the outer edge of human settlement, far beyond the bustling trade routes and shining city domes, there was silence. A silence so deep, it almost seemed alive. This was where Garen had chosen to live. A small farm on a frostbitten moon no one cared to name. 20 acres of stubborn soil, too cold and too dry to yield much more than thorn grain. He wasn't young anymore. His hands were cracked, his back bent from years of labor, and his only company was the creak of his old farmhouse in the wind. He told himself he preferred it that way. No politics, no wars, no debts he couldn't pay. Just him and the land. But silence carries weight. Some nights as he stared across the endless frozen fields, it felt less like peace and more like punishment. He missed voices. He missed laughter. He missed the warmth of something alive beside him. And then, one bitter morning, his sensors pinged. Movement near the western ridge. Not the usual scavenger trail. Something different. Something that smelled of smoke and blood. The silence was about to end. Garen rode his old hover trike across the frozen ridge, shotgun slung over his shoulder. The air burned cold in his lungs, but underneath it was another smell. Charred flesh. His gut twisted. At the tree line he found them. 4 men circled a cage made of electric mesh. Inside, 2 pale shapes huddled together, trembling. Hatchlings, dragons but small, no bigger than sheep. Their scales shimmered faint blue under the dying light, their crimson eyes wide with terror. 10,000 credits each, one poacher laughed, kicking the cage. Another grinned, cybernetic arms glinting. More if we train them, break them in. Garen's blood froze. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a hero. But something ancient stirred inside him. The stubborn, reckless defiance that made humanity survive against all odds. He gunned the trike forward, bursting into the clearing like a storm. The poachers shouted. A blaster flared. Garen fired first, dropping 1 man to the ground. Another ran. A third staggered as Garen swung a wrench into his face. And when the cyber-armed brute lunged, Garen drove his shotgun butt into the man's jaw. Silence fell. Only the dragons whimpered in the cage. The cage hissed as Garen cut the power. Slowly, carefully, he opened it. The hatchlings shrank back, pressed against each other, their breath puffing white in the cold. "It's all right," he whispered softer than he knew his voice could be. "I ain't here to hurt you." They didn't run. That surprised him. Instead, they watched, cautious, unblinking, as he reached in and guided them out. Their scales were cold to the touch, trembling under his hand. Back on the farm, Garen cleared out his barn. He laid down thermal blankets, rigged up heat lamps, and even ordered fresh meat from the nearest outpost. Credits he couldn't really spare. But it didn't matter. He couldn't stand the thought of those small creatures starving. He named them without meaning to. The larger one, scar on his horn, became Nick. The smaller, quieter one, who watched him with an intensity that felt almost human, he called Snowy. Days passed. Nick prowled the barn, growing stronger. Snowy stayed close, always watching him, always silent. And one night, as Garen poured warm water into a trough, she pressed her head against his chest. For the first time in years, Garen felt not alone. Peace on a frontier moon never lasted. A week later, Garen heard the low hum of engines. A sleek black transport ship cut across the clouds and landed at the edge of his property. Out stepped mercenaries, clean armor, polished rifles, every movement precise. At their head stood a woman with silver cybernetic eyes. "Commander Brell," she introduced herself, her voice sharp as glass. "We're here for 2 stolen assets." Garen stood firm at his gate, shotgun on his back. "Ain't nothing here but 2 creatures I pulled out of a cage." "They're not creatures," Brell replied coldly. "They're engineered weapons, property of the WIRM Syndicate. You will surrender them." Behind him, Snowy stepped onto the porch, her red eyes glowing faintly. The air thickened. Brell's gaze narrowed. "Step aside, farmer." "I won't." "You're going to die for 2 animals?" "They're my family," Garen said. And then, like a spark in his mind, he heard it. A voice. Not spoken aloud, but inside him. One word, trembling but clear. Dad. The hatchlings weren't just surviving. They had chosen him. The mercenaries raised their rifles, but the hatchlings moved first. Nick stepped beside Snowy, wings half spread, a low shriek vibrating the air. Lights flickered on the soldiers' gear. Sparks spat from their weapons. "EMP burst," one shouted. Garen fired a blast into the sky. "Leave! Now!" Brell's cybernetic eyes narrowed, calculating. She knew pushing further meant disaster. With a hiss, she signaled retreat. "This isn't over, farmer. You've made enemies." The black ship lifted into the clouds, leaving silence in its wake. Garen lowered his shotgun, heart pounding. The hatchlings pressed close, Nick defiant, Snowy gentle but unyielding. And in that moment he understood. He wasn't just keeping them alive. They had bound themselves to him in ways no syndicate could ever own. On the porch, with snow drifting around them, Snowy rested her head in his lap once more. Her thought whispered across his mind. "Home." Garen chuckled, a sound that shook loose years of loneliness. "Yeah," he murmured. "Home." The lonely farmer was lonely no more. And somewhere out in the stars, enemies were already plotting. But they had no idea what they were up against. Because these dragons had chosen a human.